Okay, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody can hear me good. Tonight's class is, of course, in the merit of all the Jewish people, especially in the land of Israel, those in the front lines, those that need healing, those that need rescuing. They should all see much success in all their endeavors, and we should, the ultimate, of course, come in Mashiach, and there will be no more war and no more bad things. Okay. Tonight we're going to be discussing this week's Torah portion, Parsha's Balak, and we are also going to be discussing a very special day. Today is the 12th day of Tammuz. It's the 97th anniversary of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's freedom from Soviet prison. He was imprisoned on charges of being a counter-revolutionary and trying to spread Judaism in the Soviet Union, and which apparently was illegal. And for this great crime, he was sentenced originally, God forbid, to death, then to prison, and then to exile, and then eventually freed after a little less than a month of being arrested. So it's a very special day, and we'll get into some of the lessons we can learn from the previous Rebbe's ordeal. Okay, let's get into it. So in this week's Torah portion, we start off right away with the story of Balak. Balak was a king of Moab, and he hires Bilam, who is a prophet of the non-Jews. He is a prophet of God, but for non-Jewish people, meaning he himself was not Jewish, and God has to give free will, so he gives the non-Jewish people a prophet as well. And he was also some sort of sorcerer of sorts. And Balak hires Bilam to curse the Jewish people, and thereby, that way, the Jewish people would become ineffective. Of course, he fails. We all know the story. God tells him, "Don't go." He doesn't listen. He goes anyways. His donkey starts to talk to him after his donkey sees an angel blocking their path, and eventually, instead of cursing the Jewish people, of course, he blesses them. That is the story, the long and short of it. But the question is, why did Balak, the king of Moab, why did he feel the need to curse the Jewish people? What was this problem? So the Torah tells us straight up, Numbers chapter 22, verses 2 through 6. The Torah tells us at the beginning of this Parsha, Vayar Balak ben Zippor, and Balak ben Zippor saw what the Jewish people had done to the Amorites. La'emori, to the Amorites. Moab became terrified of the people, meaning the Jewish people, for they were numerous, and Moab became disgusted because of the Jewish children of Israel. Okay, so that is why. They saw what happened to the Amorites. What happened to the Amorites? Let's go to the end of last week's Torah portion. In the end of last week's Torah portion, the Jewish people, they defeated the kings of Sichon and Og, who were both giants. The Jewish people asked for them permission to pass through their land. They refused, and therefore God gives them in their hands, and they defeat both of these kings. And in reaction to that, Balak is afraid. Why is he afraid? Because all the Canaanite rulers, including the rulers of Moab, were paying taxes, or they had some sort of military deal where they would pay taxes to Og and Sichon, specifically, I believe, to Sichon, the king of these kings from the Amorites, and they basically said, "Don't let the Jewish people or anyone pass through the land, and this way we'll be protected." In other words, we don't think we could have our own self-defense. They didn't have the ability to do that. And therefore, they said, let's do this buffer zone. You guys are on the border of the Canaanite nations. Why don't you make sure you take care of our security, and we will pay money. And when Balak saw what happened, that the Jewish people defeated Sichon, he was afraid. Now, the $1,000,000 question is, why would that make the nation afraid? Again, the Torah tells us, Vayagar Moav v'pnei ha'am, the nation of Moab was afraid, where they're terrified. Why was the nation afraid? Seemingly, this kind of a deal would be a state secret. It would be something that's not public knowledge. Why would you publicize that you feel like your security is not good enough that you have to have a buffer nation? So the Torah doesn't disclose that this was known to the nation. So it seems that this was not known to the nation. However, somehow they found out about it. How do they find out about it? Because we know that wicked people, they don't have self-control. And when the king of Balak, the king of Moab, found out, he let it loose. He let everybody know, and that's caused terror in the nation. And now that he had a terrified nation, he had to do something about it. So what does he do? He hires Balaam. So we see here that Balak did not have control over his emotions, and he let it get best of him, and it allowed him to let everybody know that there was this deal, and that the king Sichon was supposed to defend them, and it failed. Now let's contrast this to the end of last week's Torah portion. Moses had a similar situation. Moses, after the defeat of Sichon, they were now threatened by Og. So the Og Melech HaBashan comes out to wage war after Sichon was defeated. So now all of a sudden, after the Torah tells us, after Sichon is defeated, God says to Moses, do not fear him, for I have delivered him, his people, and his land into your hand. Out of the blue, just says, don't fear him. Okay? And the Talmud in Tractate Nida asked the $1 million question, why did God feel the need to tell Moses not to fear Og? It doesn't say that when about Sichon. If anything, if God were to say before every battle, don't fear him, never happened, no other battle, and specifically all of a sudden after the previous battle, and not only that, Sichon and Og were both giants. Not only were they both giants, they were actually brothers. So seemingly their physical strength would have been their physical strength would have been on a similar par. They're both giants. How they came to be is that the Torah tells us in the Medrash, Bereshis Rabbah, that there were these angels that came down from heaven, and they had children, and eventually their children had these giants, and two of them were Sichon and Og, and they became the king of these nations by force. Rabbi Tzadok says that these giants with corrupt hearts who take what they please and murder descend from them. Right? They said that they were a very rebellious, and they were again descendant of angels. Leave that medrash where it is. But the point is that these are ancient giants, and all of a sudden Moses is afraid. He's not afraid of Sichon. God doesn't tell him to be afraid, but God says, "Don't be afraid of Og." Now, the reason why Moses was afraid, the Talmud explains that actually the problem was not that there was any physical strength more of Og versus Sichon, but there was a spiritual problem. What was the spiritual problem? In the story of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings, it says that Og rescued Abraham. Okay, so Og, it says that Torah says Vayavai hapalit. Okay, and the Torah tells us that the palit, this refugee, was Og, and he told Abraham, and Abraham then went and that his nephew Lot was captured. Abraham goes, and Og goes and Og is, I guess, he's the one who informs Abraham. So because Abraham is informed about this, and he's able to then save his family, his nephew, so therefore Og is given this tremendous spiritual protection. So Moses is afraid in his heart, right? It says that that God tells him, don't fear him. And the Talmud tells us, so Moses was afraid in his heart that perhaps the merit of having saved Abraham and his family, perhaps that would be steadfast for him, and he would be successful in his war against the Jewish people. Which, in and of itself, the fact that Moses felt that helping Abraham could be such a merit, in and of itself, could be a lesson we could learn. But we'll put that on the side for now. So the $1 million question is, we have a few $1 million questions. The $1 million question is, why does the Talmud say that Moses was afraid in his heart? Why does the Talmud have to tell us that word, in his heart? Where else would you be afraid? That's where fear comes from. It's an emotion. The Talmud is telling us that Moses kept it to himself. In fact, the Torah does not say that Moses made an announcement or Moses confronts God. All of a sudden, just out of the blue, God tells Moses, don't fear him. right? That I'm going to deliver him to your hands. Because Moses was the opposite of Balak. Balak, that we said in this week's Torah portion, Balak is the one who blabs it out to the whole country, and he gets them in a fear, and eventually this leads to their downfall. But Moses, he keeps it to himself, and he goes on as if nothing happened. And in fact, God tells him, "Don't worry, it's all going to be okay." Now, we see that there's a really important lesson here about not being afraid. That even Moses, it wasn't that he was afraid and it affected him. It was in his heart. It was something that he thought about, something that impressed on him, that he had to deal with, perhaps the spiritual merit that Og had over Sichon. However, he didn't let it overtake him, and for sure he didn't let it overtake the people and bring them to fear. Because we know, especially in the military, that that fear is the beginning of the end. But even in life throws things at us, and we could become afraid, and that fear itself is what drags us down. Let's look at a story. We were talked about tonight. Today and tonight is the 12th day of Tammuz, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's liberation from Soviet prison. One of the things that he made a decision, and he talks about it, he wrote down his memoirs of his experiences in prison. He made a decision that he was not going to show any fear to his captors. Unfortunately, the people who arrested him were Jews. They were Jew. It was called from the Ivrei Yevseksia, which means the Jewish section of the KGB, or I don't know what, I think it was the KGB at that time, could be the NKVD, or whatever it was, the whatever iteration it was, the GPU or NKVD, whatever it was. He decided he was not going to give in an inch. He refused to. He acted as if he was a free man. And you read it, and you understand where he was. They were trying to intimidate him. They come in the middle of the night to arrest him, and they intimidate his family. They throw papers all over the floor. His elderly mother was there, and they frighten her. They take him, in this car with political prisoners. And actually, apparently what happened was, the reason the KGB felt that they had the ability to do this was the ambassador, the Soviet ambassador to Poland, had been assassinated that day or that evening, and they felt that they could take advantage of that. And they arrested many, many Jewish people, I should say religious people, clergy from other religions as well, Jewish people, Hasidim, and most people who were arrested that night were shot. And the previous Rebbe said he's not going to show any fear, and he's speaking to them in Yiddish because they're all Jews. Some of them were even Hasidim of his grandfather, unfortunately, and he refused to give an inch. So they told him to stand up. He just refused to stand up. He wouldn't give them eye contact. They threatened him with a gun, and he refused to be intimidated one bit. And they beat him. They beat him badly. And later in his life, he suffered many diseases, including MS, Parkinson's, which can't directly link it, but it's probably linked to the trauma that he faced at that time. They threw him down the stairs. Very terrible, terrible things they did to him. So going back to the story, so that night they were going to shoot everybody. That was they was not going to be. They felt that they had this opportunity, the Soviets, that they could just they could just kill someone before any word got out. There was even somebody that had even taken these prisoners, and unfortunately, many people were shot that night. And the previous Rebbe was told, "Go walk down this hallway," and he sees there's two hallways. There's like a dark hallway, and there's a hallway of like a brightly lit hallway, and with a bench. And he was tired, so he says, "Why should I rush?" He felt that I'm not going to show any fear. I'm going to sit down on the bench. And he sat down on the bench. He lights up a cigarette. And eventually he's confronted, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, I'm supposed to go down the other hallway." They say, "No, it can't be." They didn't. Even the workers in the prison didn't believe that they were going to take him down the other hallway, which they knew what would happen if he went down that hallway where they were shooting people that night. And eventually he's actually saved. He lives that day, and because the words gets out, the international pressure eventually is one of the reasons that eventually he's released from prison. And we see how the lack of fear that he, even though he was personally, you read his memoir, he was personally did not know what was going to happen. He was probably the most surprised person in the world that he was released. He was ready to fight for Judaism to the death. And even though that he was, he didn't know what was going to be, he refused to show fear. And that itself, the lack of showing fear, is what led to his survival. So we see that, and of course, the previous Rebbe is also a Jewish leader, following in the path of Moses. He learned this idea from Moses that don't show any fear. And even though we might not be Moses and we might not be the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, we know that when it comes to life challenges, that life throws challenges at us, and we might even be dealing with our evil inclination or things that are, we feel overwhelmed by. The truth is that if we show fear, even within ourselves, that basically we're basically admitting to it. We're saying, yes, we are fearful, and that thing shows that challenge shows that it has dominion over us, and that's the beginning of the end. And we have to understand that, yes, we might not know what's going to happen. We might not know what the end will be, but we know that God is with us. And because God is with us, we don't have to fear. We don't have to be afraid of whatever outcome is going to happen. We don't have to be afraid of it. And that itself gives us the fortitude to continue on. So I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.